sense of the
Oh,
word. It's more
we're going live if any of this is proprietary.
okay.
Sorry, thought I should chime that in.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I'll leave this meeting.
Going live if any of this is.
So Lee, the next time you're buying the strippers,
Okay.
that was
You know,
expensive. I couldn't afford to get the Coke and the strippers.
honey upped my allowance to $50 a week, so we're good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Clint just killed my monetization.
It happens.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us again for another episode of SEO Fight Club. Little bit of bad news. Kyle needs to take some time off for some life maintenance, so he may not be back for a couple of months or so. We'll see how he's doing and take it week by week. So just wanted to let everybody know that if you come here for Kyle, he's going to be out for a little bit. But we do have Clint Butler still with us, and that's a victory in and of itself because Clint is awesome, which brings us, let me start my slide presentation here, brings us to our first boilerplate. What's new, Clint?
Oh, no pressure at all. There's been a lot of people. You kind of know how like topics kind of go around and around in our space, and now the new topic is those city landing pages, and should you be doing them, and are they within terms of service and all that stuff. So you go over that, the concept of what those pages are, how to make them, and show a lot of, I don't know if they're Fortune 500 companies, but they are pretty well up there, big brands that are using that very exact same concept to rank very well in the search engines. And why I think that if you are an SEO, recommending to a business not to make those because of your, I would argue, a misunderstanding of the Google terms of service, you're doing your clients a disservice. So
Well,
I like the episode.
I have a related question for you. It's not about your show. So I'll just say that's an awesome topic. And if you want to see that show, which I recommend you do, that you go to YouTube and search for SEO this week, and it'll be the first result. So highly recommend Clint's show. But on a related topic, it's kind of like city pages. There's this other SEO concept where people say, oh, because I can index a page for hundreds of different keywords, that means that page can rank well for hundreds of different keywords. In your experience, how difficult is it to get a single page to rank well for hundreds of keywords?
Well, I think that kind of goes off of that one, right? Where the discussion we had, it was probably one of our better episodes where we were talking about the difference between indexing and ranking. And so I have been using your methodology that you did with the HTML tags test and applying that to schema and filling in all of those blanks and everything, and trying to get pages to rank based off of the schema for multiple keywords. It ranks fine for the index keyword, the page that it ranks fine for the and indexes. So it ranks and indexes for the test keyword, but it doesn't rank for a lot of the test keywords inside of the schema. And doing that, I would say, like, trying to do it on purpose is kind of a pain. It's easier to give Google as much as you want, like you guys did the million words test, and see where it shakes out and then work from there versus trying to force a whole bunch of craziness, in my opinion.
Yeah, the reason I ask is I see this common concept where people are like, tuning one keyword, one page is stupid because my page indexes for hundreds of keywords. And I'm just wondering, how good is that approach where you just try to make one page rank for hundreds of keywords well? And I have some doubts, and I'm starting to do my testing and research, and that's why I bring it up. Is I'm kind of pulling some expert opinions to see, to gut check my instincts that there might be something in this concept that needs to be worked out.
Well, you can do it, right? So keyword clusters, and topic clusters. Kyle and I were teaching that early on in SIA, but we weren't calling it that. That's where the writing your pages in outline format came in. So we were doing, this is the primary keyword for the paper, and then the H2s and H3s were all the related searches. So ergo, we were optimizing for multiple terms, but we weren't going hundreds and thousands. The after effect of doing that allowed us to rank for hundreds and thousands of different keywords, not necessarily ranking well, but we ranked for that, for more keywords, right? So when I write a paper for in the rehab market, for example, 1,500 2,000 words, I can usually depend on ranking, showing up at least for about 250 to 500 separate keywords that I wasn't targeting. And then the rest of that, in my experience, has been pushed by anchor text. And
Because
that's, go
I've
ahead.
always found that I've been like really, really good at taking a page and ranking it for like some very closely related variations
Yeah.
or closely related topical keywords. And it's typically on the order of, from one to maybe a dozen or so.
Yeah.
And, I will index those pages obviously for hundreds of terms, up to however many unique terms are in the first 200,000 words about. But I don't rank well for most of those hundreds of terms. Obviously, those closely related ones I tend to do really well with, but I don't ever see a good example of a single page ranking well. And I think the key is that where I'm differing from other SEOs on this is the definition of ranking well. I
Yeah.
think my definition of that is very different than what these other people are using.
Yeah. Yeah. If the way I look at it, my primary keyword and then my related searches, so that's 3 to 12. That's so what it is. I'm looking for page one. And then those other 250, 500 that I get, I mean, those are in the index is kind of how I look at it, right? And
Yeah,
and they're being ranked, but unless they're on page one, they're probably little of no value to me.
exactly. And the other concept I'm finding in that is that if you're actively tuning a page to be optimally tuned, you start tuning for one optimally, it kind of wrecks the tuning for the other 11.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard to be optimally tuned for, several keywords simultaneously. You tend to always be tuned best for one and then tuned to a lesser extent for the others. And I kind of find that it's cost prohibitive. And so when people tell me this notion that they're ranking well for hundreds of keywords from a single page, my spider senses go off and I'm like, that doesn't sound quite right. And so I'm soliciting examples. So if anybody out there knows of an example of a page, a single URL that's ranking well for hundreds of keywords, I'd love to see it. Just to study it. I'm happy to keep it secret. Just to learn more. But I'm not finding an example. And I know that there is an exception. Like if you have extreme amounts of authority, you can do this. Like if you're spending a mountain of authority on a single URL, you can just add keywords and rank pretty well for them. But I'm looking for the case where it's not the enterprise organization with a mountain of authority. I'm looking for an average Joe that says this is an SEO tactic for all of us, you do this type of long form content and you can rank well for lots and lots of keywords. And I haven't found one yet.
I haven't made one yet. I consider myself pretty good at SEO, and I haven't made one yet.
Yeah. So I'm searching for this concept because it keeps coming to me. People keep saying, no, Ted, you're doing SEO wrong, because I get my pages to rank for hundreds of keywords well, and I'm skeptical.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see it. I want to learn more. I want to correct my perspective if I'm not seeing the problem right. So
Yeah, I'd be down to learn that too, because like I said, you build the content outline, 4 to 12 keywords, related keywords, and then Search Console tells you the rest. Then you look at the impression count. And if the impression count's high and my ranking is 38, imagine what I could do if I can rank number top 3. So it would be cool to know that.
yeah, exactly. So keep that in mind, people. If you have a good example and you want to take Ted to school, I'd love to learn on this topic. So
All right. So Ted, just to help out, if I'm looking, like if I don't have one, but how many terms do I need to rank on page 1 before you'd consider it a good example?
my mind would be blown at 50. So 50 or more, I'm interested in taking a look.
That would be a good one.
And the less authority the page has, the more interested I am. And but I'd like the keywords to at least have search volume. So if the keywords don't have measurable search volume, they don't count. So I think it'll be interesting if anything comes to the surface on that. I'd love to hear about it. All right, so SEO video show. If you haven't heard about it, Dre DeVera's show. It's an interview show. He's killing it, absolutely killing it. He is quite possibly the most networked guy in SEO at this point. Check out his show. It's amazing. So you just go to YouTube, search for SEO video show. And Carolyn, what is going on this week?
I thought you might ask me, so I actually looked at it. I decided I was going to share some of the SEO projects that I'm working on, and some test results, SEO test results, but kind of presenting them in a way that a business owner or a marketing manager can really make the connection between how does this help them.
Very cool. Isn't that kind of against your concept though? Aren't you going to accidentally give some people some SEO tactics?
I did realize that might happen. So I do fess up in the beginning of it that I made a liar out of myself.
Well, I'm sure that the SEOs will forgive you for sharing some tactics. Definitely check out this podcast. If you like Radiolab, I view it as Radiolab, but for SEO. So it's kind of more the human story in most of the episodes. It's really cool. So if you're looking for SEO content to consume, you can search for this one by name in Google. It's in many different platforms, so it's probably available in the podcast platform of your choice. But you can also just search for it by name. All right. So a lot of stuff in IMG. Going to try to go through this quickly. We have a recent course launched for bulk CTR manipulation by Chris Palmer. He's pretty well known in SEO circles. So if you're interested in how that works, it's a very tricky thing to master. So I recommend that you do your homework before you attempt doing it. And so that's one place to learn about the topic. We have from the library, How to Land High Ticket Clients by Erock. And Erock's a great guy, and he understands sales and networking. And so I've worked with him in the past. So if you're looking on how to land and close those deals, that's a great resource. We do our featured member Friday. It's a nice perk to get to know the community. We have the YouTube show roundup on Monday coming up. And of course, the Ask Ted Anything on Tuesday. Nothing's off the table. You can ask me any questions at this event about my deepest, darkest secrets, best tactics. I don't hide anything in these AMA events. Just bring your questions. And that'll bring us back to next week's SEO Fight Club. So today we're going to talk about page speed, and specifically an aspect of page speed that SEOs commonly screw up. And if you're not aware of the technical ins and outs of this aspect of page speed, you could be doing a lot of harm to your clients. And this is going to get into a lot of different areas. So mostly the slides in this are just visual aids, and we're just going to talk about it. But we're going to talk about initial request versus repeat requests. So first of all, we need to define what's going on in a request. So you have your Chrome browser, and you're going to request a URL to a web page. And then Chrome looks at that web page and says, oh, I need to also get this CSS file. I need to get this stack of images. I may need to get a stack of JavaScript files. And then I need to render all of those into a page. And then I actually have what to show people, that rendered HTML. And so by requesting one URL, you're causing the browser to request lots of different asynchronous requests for different resources that are needed to draw the page. And what a lot of people have been doing, especially in the WordPress arena where people buy themes, and there's lots of comments about how fast or slow various themes are, there's this practice of inlining all the scripts. And when you inline the scripts, the HTML gets bigger. So you see how this HTML is bigger? It's because the CSS and the JavaScript were inlined. So instead of making asynchronous requests for external scripts, they were included inside the HTML, making a bigger HTML page. Still has external images, and there are ways to inline images too, but we're not going into that today. So we have these two methodologies, one where you have all your scripts as asynchronous requests, so your browser has to request many URLs to fully render a page, and one where all those resources are inline, so there's fewer asynchronous requests. And they do this because it's generally faster on an initial request. So when we look at what's going on in a browser, when somebody first visits your page and then continues browsing through your website, we have this asynchronous model with the external scripts. And so on the first request, you request the HTML, and then the browser makes a bunch of extra web requests to get all those files. Then what happens is all these files down here, the images, the JavaScript, the CSS, they're all in the local browser cache on your computer. So if you reload the page or visit at a later time, it doesn't make these requests again because they're still saved. And if you browse different pages and they use those same styles and scripts and images, they don't load on those pages either. They're pulled out of that cache. So you have this big initial request with all those asynchronous resource requests, but then on all the subsequent pages, they're tiny requests that are very fast because you don't have to reload all that stuff. Now, when you inline all those scripts and you have the big page because you put all those scripts in the HTML, it can't make use of the caching. So when you visit the page again, or when you visit other pages that use the same styles and scripts, there's still big requests. It has to transfer all that inline script over and over and over again because it can't make use of the caching. So when you do all that inline, you're making your repeat requests, your repeat visits, bigger than they need to be. So when we look at various page speed tools, this is a page speed test, I believe. When you look at them, there are often options for being able to see the first view metrics as well as the repeat view metrics. And so in the waterfall, we see the initial page load, and then we see resources being loaded. And then, you know, maybe this is a YouTube embedded video and it spawns off a ton of other resources to load, or maybe it's an advertising iframe, or who knows. But you could see all these asynchronous requests that are kicking off on that first view. And then on the repeat view, that waterfall stack is much shorter. And when you look at the time, that first view, because of all those asynchronous web requests, you know, it's 5 seconds and change. But on the repeat view, it's under 1 second. It's sub-second because of the browser caching of all those external files. If you took all those external files and made them inline in the main request, then your repeat benchmarks are going to be similar to your first view benchmarks. And so this brings up a couple issues. But first, on the web page test, the repeat view setting is what you're looking for. First view and repeat view. I believe the default is set on first view only. And I think a lot of people make the mistake of only tuning for first view. So one of the things we want to consider in this is that you need to consider the nature of the traffic your website gets. So if you are doing a lead gen website where you're bringing people into a page and then you're sending them off to somewhere else to be monetized, and they never generally spend any time browsing your website, and they're often first-time visitors, they're never repeat visitors, then tuning this way for that slightly better initial view makes a lot of sense. But if you're an online retailer where people come into your store and they browse your categories and they look at lots of product pages and things of that nature, you'd really want this architecture so that that browser session that they're going through, that shopping session, is optimal. You have one pricey initial page view, but then the rest of the session is like optimized for conversion. And so if you went to an online retailer and inlined all their scripts and styles and did this to every page view they're going to get, and you're probably going to do severe harm to that online retailer. You have configured your page speed tuning the wrong way for the traffic behaviors that the site gets. So this configuration makes a lot of sense for lead gen, but this configuration if you have people browsing the website. Any thoughts on that so far, Clint?
No, I'm pretty much with you right now.
Yeah. So the the main concept to think about is, what what do you need for the traffic and the types of visits you're getting? And I'll tell you right now, and I know that Lee and his wife are doing research in this area, and so I don't want to spoil too much of it, but I'll tell you right now, nearly all WordPress themes out of the box are tuned for lead gen. They're not tuned for longer sessions where people are browsing page to page. And I believe, what's probably happening there is the people making the themes are just tuning it for, as best they can for an initial page view. And then they call it good. And that's what you're left with. So if you have more involved sessions than just an initial page view, you may want to modify or change your theme to be more optimal so that those sessions aren't as brutal as transferring the scripts and styles every time on every request, which is overkill.
Ted, I have a question on that, if it's all right.
Sure.
When you're looking at that top piece that you have up there, let's assume that top architecture is the slower one and it loads at the 5.3 seconds that you showed earlier. If I combine all that into the lower architecture, how much time am I really saving?
Oh, it can be drastic on that first request. You might find that if there are a ton of these asynchronous requests, and I'm going to go deeper into why this is the case, but if you find that there's a lot of these, and I've seen WordPress blogs that would have 200 asynchronous requests, 200 extra browser URL lookups for every page view, then doing this inline could save a ton of time compared. So if this is 5 seconds, you might find that this is, 3.5 seconds if done really well.
Okay.
But then when this is sub-second and this is still 3.5 seconds, on those repeat visits, you're paying a heavy price.
Right.
So you might win on the initial, but you're going to lose on all the following requests.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Pre-render and pre-fetch fit into that?
Well, that's getting more advanced and getting into specific browser stack technologies. So there are ways that people are mitigating those pain points. And I'm going to leave those for a future date. But yes, there are other ways that you can hybridize some of these effects and mitigate some of the pain points.
Okay.
So the next thing we want to talk about is why are asynchronous requests bad and why are they so painful? And the reason is they're kind of like phone calls. They're like old-fashioned analog telephone calls. So you have an HTTP 1.1, which is the protocol that web browsers communicate with servers using. It goes something like this. First, the browser has to connect to the server, so we're going to dial the phone number, the URL, and we're going to wait for the other side to answer the call. And then when they do, we have to do our hello exchanges first. We have to handshake. We have to say, hi, how are you? Are you ready for what I'm about to ask for? And the server's going to say, oh, I'm doing fine. Of course, I'm ready for what you're about to ask for. And then the browser is going to say, I would like jQuery.js. And the server will say, hey, I happen to have jQuery.js. I'm going to start sending you the information. And that's a phone call. Then the browser gets to the next file and says, oh, I need jexample.css. Let me dial the server again. I'm going to dial their number. I'm going to wait for them to answer. Oh, hello again. It's me. Are you still able to take my request? And the server says, yes, I am. And then he say, I want jexample.css. So you're doing all of this phone calling, creating a new phone call and doing all the handshake protocol and the document requesting and transfer on different phone calls that are happening. Now they're asynchronous, so sometimes they're parallel phone calls, but oftentimes they're blocked. And so you'll see that a web browser, even in ideal conditions, might only do 5 or 10 asynchronous requests at a time. And so if you have 200, you're going to like cap out at 10 and wait for them to finish before you launch more. And that's why you start seeing that staggered waterfall in those diagrams. Now, this protocol was improved a few years ago. They came out with HTTP2, and it's been notoriously buggy because it's a new foundation protocol and it takes a while for those to become stable. It's largely stable now. It's stable enough that now Google is using it in Googlebot as well. And the way this one works is they get rid of the multiple phone calls. So it's a lot more efficient. And this protocol, the browser says, oh, I need resources. I'm going to call the server, and dials the server, says, hello, how are you? Are you ready for my request? Server says yes. And then it says, well, I'm going to ask for multiple things in this one call. Give me jQuery, JS, JExample, and this stack of images. And it sends all the files over the one call. So it gets rid of all of that handshaking and all of that waiting for responses. And it's very fast. I've seen cases where switching a web server's configuration from HTTP 1.1 to HTTP 2, I've seen it make a 10x performance in some configurations. Now, oftentimes it's not that dramatic, but it can be. That's like the most eye-opening, eye-popping protocol change result. But it's common that it's 3 times faster, 5 times faster. And so it's very important to understand. And when you're dealing with a product like a template that you're selling, and you're worried about how it's going to perform speed-wise because that reputation may affect your sales, it makes sense to inline all these things because you're kind of forcing this HTTP2 behavior on the first connection. Now, it's bad because you're making it so that the local browser cache can't work its magic, but it's probably why all those WordPress theme developers are doing as much as they can inline, is that even if you're on an old school connection, you kind of get this behavior when they inline all those resources. Now, if you're wondering if your server is using these protocols, you can tell in the Chrome inspector. When you go to the network inspector and refresh the page, you can right click on the heading bar and you can tell it to show the protocol, and it'll tell you H2 is that HTTP2 protocol or versus the 1.1. And here I got it from Clint's website because I knew he had it enabled. And so I went to the insecure page and it redirected to a secure page, but it also changed my protocol from 1.1 to 2. And when you use CDNs and other services, they probably also use 2. So you can have a mixed bag between the protocols. If your server is 1.1, but your CDN is 2, you'll see both and it'll be on a resource by resource basis. And oftentimes where people are getting hurt is when they serve some scripts and style sheets and images from their hosting server and some of them from the CDN. And the CDN ones will have H2, but the ones they host from their own server don't. And you kind of want to clean all that up to get the best page speed. And then on another note, because we're talking about CDNs at this point, is that there's this concept of the byte size of the headers. And one of the headers that's communicated is the cookies that the web pages use. And cookies are kind of a key value memory that browser and the server can exchange to remember things. So it'll remember what settings you would like for your browser session, or if you're currently logged in, how can it verify if your session is still valid and secure? And so headers are kind of like if you're sending a letter to someone, the letter you write that you stuff into the envelope is the content. All right. The headers are kind of the information you put on the envelope so that it can be sent the right way. It might have the tracking code. It might be first class mail, it might be third class mail, it might be, whatever, all that information is like kind of like the header information. And all that header information is text. So when you request an HTML document, the headers and the cookies are all part of the envelope for that HTML page. But what people don't realize is that those headers and cookies are also being transferred for the CSS file. They're also being transferred for the JS file. They're also being transferred for each of the image files. They're also being transferred for the web fonts. So when you inline these things, you get rid of all of that overhead for over communicating those cookies and headers. And oftentimes you don't even need the cookies for this stuff because it's only your web page that's going to have behaviors for the cookies, but they're still coming across on the images. Unless you have a dynamic image app that can respond to the cookies, there's no point on cookies and other headers being sent for an image request. It's just wasted bandwidth. And so when people are inlining, they're also eliminating that overhead, but you don't have to inline. You can put it on a CDN, and CDNs are configured to not send cookies. They're configured to minimize the number of headers they send. So when you take these resources off your server and put them on the CDN, it's like making them inline, but better because the browser can still cache. So you get, when you combine using this model where you're doing asynchronous requests with the CDN and you're doing it all via H2, I mean, that's where you get your wicked fast page speed tuning. But ultimately, with all of these things, you really have to consider first and foremost, what is the behavior of your traffic? And so are you mostly getting new visitors to a page? Do you mostly have people coming back? Or is it mostly repeat visitors? Do you have short sessions? Is it people are one and done on, I see a page and that's it, like in lead gen? Or are they long sessions where they browse your website and look at lots of different pages? And how big are your sessions? If you have very short sessions, that might lean you one way. But if you have very long sessions where people, have lots of different requests, you'll want to consider it. And the number of requests per page view, how many asynchronous requests you have, because there is a limit. There's a practical point where if you request so many external files, it's just slow no matter what you do. And so you want to keep an eye on that asynchronous request count, because if that gets to be 500, your page is slow no matter what protocol you use. So, you got to kind of balance all these things. And then based on all of those inputs, then you can pick a strategy. But what I see happening in most of the SEO communities out there is everybody's tuning for the initial request, and they get that looking the way they want it, and then they think they're done. And I see nobody mentioning the repeat views and when those are important. And so I bring it up because if I were to go to an online retailer that has a ton of traffic and I tune their initial request by putting a bunch of scripts in line, I would ruin their customer experience on all the repeat views. The fact that there's a lot of shopping across different pages, fact that a lot of their customers are repeat customers, I'd be ignoring the bulk. I would be sacrificing the average page view for the initial. And that would be a mistake in a conversion-based system like an online store. But if I was doing lead gen, I don't have people browsing. It's probably a one-page experience, and everyone coming to that page is probably brand new, never been there before. So in a lead gen scenario, that's kind of the right tool for the default that I'm seeing in most WordPress themes. Any thoughts? Because if not, that is where we're at. Let me look at questions here. Let's see, trying to understand things. I didn't look for 10 minutes, so now some of them are way past where they were relevant. Sorry, Thane.
I wonder how many people are like me, and at some point your voice sounded like the Charlie Brown teacher.
Wah, 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 wah. Well, ultimately, if you walk away with one thing out of this whole thing, it's this setting here on web page test, first and repeat view. And all this does is it's going to give you 2 entries instead of 1. So you'll see first view labeled and repeat view. And if you're, a lead gen website, 1 page view per visitor, and then that's all you ever want from them, you just tune for that alone. But if you have people that need to browse and convert with a shopping cart and view lots of different pages, then you kind of need to tune for the repeat view as well. And so if you've been ignoring the repeat view, that's the thing I want you to fix. I want you to think about when you need to tune for that and how you plan to do it.
So Ted, how does this tie into Core Web Vitals?
This is all between the browser and the server. So these are behaviors that happen when a browser tries to get resources from the server. Core Web Vitals is partially that, but it's more about the client side rendering of the page. How efficiently does that client side render the code that's been sent to it? So in a way, Core Web Vitals is more client side than client server. And it's more about how efficient is your website coded. So is it efficient in how it draws to the page? Is it efficient in when the page becomes responsive to user input? And so it's more focused on the client side. And you'll tend to see the scoring for Core Web Vitals get worse when you're dealing with slower computers with slower connections. So when you have a mobile phone on a 4G connection out at a bus stop, it's going to have a hard time fetching and rendering a web page, especially like a bloated WordPress theme, efficiently. And so if you can make that more efficient, then that user experience gets better. And in theory, Google's going to reward you somehow for that. And it makes sense that Google would want that because they have their mobile first indexing. And if the whole world was more efficient and their code quality and how efficient their pages render, that's pure operating cost reduction for Googlebot for mobile first. So there's clearly an upside for Google in Core Web Vitals. Now, the question is, what kind of upside are you going to get for investing and tuning for it? And my guess, we don't know yet, it's not officially out. My guess is the reward for tuning for it's going to be pretty close to zero. The reason being is that if it's a strong factor, then it's going to detract from relevancy. And if it's a strong factor, it's going to go into effect largely on slow connections on mobile devices at bus stops. And that kind of means that relevancy would matter less at bus stops. And if you think about that, that's really just kind of stupid. And so I just can't imagine it being a strong factor. Like the stronger it is, the more outlandish it becomes. And so I know why Google wants it, but it just can't be a strong factor.
So let me ask this: if I'm looking at this chart, is Core Web Vitals for my site impacted by the percentage of people that are repeat viewers or not?
Well, it depends. If things like if your phone can only do 4 requests at a time because its connection is limited, then your asynchronous request count could affect your cumulative layout shift or how interactive and when your web page is interactive. So there is some overlap between client server, but a lot of what they're measuring is kind of like rendering efficiency. So Core Web Vitals touches on this some, but general page speed tuning is all just client server interaction. So Core Web Vitals is more about the rendering efficiency on the device and connection speed.
All right, thanks, man.
So with that, thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next week. Please remember to subscribe.